You had a role to play in the releasing of Gilad Shalit, correct?
Yep.
Let's talk about that. I'm very interested in what your role is, how you came to be in that role, and what that really looked like.
And around the time that Hamas won the elections, I had an opportunity to be at a conference that took place in Cairo, where I was introduced to someone from Gaza who came to Cairo because he heard there might be some Israelis at this conference. It was a conference on Mediterranean development. And he approached me through a Palestinian colleague from Gaza who was there, who happened to be one of his teachers in the past. And he was introduced to me and said, I'm a professor of economics at the Islamic University. I'm a member of Hamas, and I've never met a Jew before, never talked to an Israeli before. I had actually never, more than 20 years of working with Palestinians, had never talked to anyone from Hamas. So we excused ourselves from the conference. We spent about 6 hours talking over the next couple of days. And while we didn't agree on anything, we agreed that we should continue talking, and we did. We met, and I proposed to him that we expand the dialogue, and we tried to figure out ways of doing it. I put together a group of Israelis. He put together a group of his colleagues from Hamas. And I found three countries that were willing to host these talks that were not members of the European Union and were not Arab countries, but they were not far away like Australia. They were close enough to get to. And the first country that agreed to host him told me to get the copies of the passports of the Palestinians. And it's a long story. To make it short, the Palestinian leadership in the end put a veto on this dialogue. It involved me going to Gaza twice to meet with them and to try to convince them, but it didn't work. But this professor and I continued our contact even after that. Gilad Shalit was abducted on June 25th, 2006. Um, we were actually at the final day of a Israeli-Palestinian peace NGO conference on the Dead Sea on the Jordanian side. Getting ready to leave on the bus to go back to Israel, we heard on the news that some incident happened in Gaza, and learned later that day that Gilad Shalit had been killed, abducted, and two Israeli soldiers were killed. 6 days later, on the 1st of July, this professor from Gaza called me and said, Gershon, we have to do something. I said, what do you mean? He said, we're being bombed. We have no water. We have no electricity. The situation is really bad. We have to do something. I said to him, Mohammed, what can we do? He said, let's try to open up a channel of communication. He went to the Hamas prime minister's office. They called me half an hour later, and that started a process. Later that day, I organized a phone call between Noam Shalit, Gilad Shalit's father, and one of the Hamas leaders. The next day, the Shalit family came to Jerusalem, and I met them for the first time. Then I spent the next 3 months trying to get a proof of life. After 3 months, I produced a letter handwritten by Gilad Shalit that was delivered to the Egyptian headquarters representative office in Gaza and then sent to the Israelis. And then the Egyptians came in the process and didn't want any back channels. Israel was engaged in a war in Lebanon and a war in Gaza at the same time. We were trying to achieve a ceasefire. To make a long story, a very long story, very short, because Gilad Shalit was held for 5 years and 4 months. Over those 5 years and 4 months, I continued over and over again to have a secret direct back channel. Most of the time, it was rejected by the Israeli side. In April of 2011, when Netanyahu appointed a new person to be in charge of the file, I contacted him, David Meidan. He was an active senior Mossad officer. And I told David Meidan about my contacts in Hamas and told him that I have direct contacts. And after 3 weeks, when he got into the position and learned the file, he called me and asked me to send a message to Hamas. And I sent a message, and within an hour, I got an answer. And they were blown away because the answer came from Ahmed Jabri, who was the head of the Palestinian military forces responsible for Gaza and keeping Gilad Shalit. And then the Israelis verified that this was a live channel, and David Meidan got permission from Netanyahu to run a secret direct back channel. Netanyahu didn't know it was me. He just knew that David Meidan had a direct back channel, and he got permission to use it. And over the next few months, we and my Palestinian counterpart, Dr. Azi Hamad, negotiated 7 versions of a document. That the 7th version, which was actually produced on July 14th, 2011, it became known as the breakthrough document. And that was the basis for the agreement that was made between Israel and Hamas later. Gilad came home in October of that year, and it could have been done much earlier, could have been done years earlier, the same agreement, because the Egyptians had reached an agreement with Israel and Hamas in December of 2006, 6 months after he was abducted, for a prisoner exchange of 1,000 prisoners for Gilad Shalit in two stages. One, based on a list of 450 names submitted by Hamas, and the second of 550 names submitted by Israel. And that was exactly the agreement that was reached 5 years later.